DNA Studios. Step into a new dimension.
Hello guys, welcome back to another DNA Studios video. My name is A. Goldman, or Aaron. I am your host and the founder, one of the founders and creators of DNA My Blog. And before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself for those of you who might be new, or for those of you who have not watched one of my videos. And I just want to take one moment to explain what's been going on. So if you guys don't know, or if you guys haven't jumped on Instagram, go follow us on Instagram, DNA Blog. You can type that in, you search for us, you'll find us on Instagram. Just make sure you do it in not capital, it's lowercase. Anyway, and find us on Instagram and you shall find us. And if you have not jumped on Instagram, or if you aren't following us on Instagram, then you probably don't know, or you probably haven't, I have not said this yet, let's put it that way. That the studio here has been under renovations, so we have 2 new windows, and that has taken a little while to get everything back to the way it was, since I had to kind of do the studio had to be cleared out, covered, and things had to be shifted around, and due to that I couldn't record. So yeah, it wasn't, let's put it this way, it wasn't very fun. So yeah, anyway. But I'm back. So yeah, I'm back, and so that's why I haven't uploaded in a couple Wednesdays. The last video, like I've said on Instagram, was the Cyborg 009. If you want to watch that video, you can go back and jump on our YouTube channel. I'll put a link underneath the video, and you guys can watch that video. Pretty awesome video. I didn't do too much on it because a lot of people have actually done deep dives. A lot of other anime YouTubers have done deep dives on that. Really good series, but I just didn't want to go too deep into it because there have been a lot of other people. There's a lot of other content up there, up on YouTube. So, you know. Anyway, that's not what today's video is about. Today's video is it's on a show that I've done before. If you go back and if you go back and look at the videos we've done, I did do a video kind of touching on this one, or on these 2 series, I should say. Both the same show, but just very different story, but very similar characters. Not exactly the same, because the new series the characters are different. Same look, and the characters look the same, but are very different actually in their personalities and the way they and the way they act, and also the story. The story is also very different. So without ado, let me give you a hint, I should say, as to what show I am referring to. So let me just make sure. Perfect. Okay. Anyway, so the show that I'm going to be doing today, and a lot of you might know this, or that I'm going to be talking more in depth about, same series but told 2 very different ways, and 2 very different stories, I should say. So anyway, that show is this. Or, as some of you might know, some of you also might know it this way. For anyone who's watched the newer series, you might know it with this theme song. So, let's see. Wait a minute. Whoop. Anyway, so those are the 2 series. So that's the show I'm going to be going a deep dive, or doing an more in-depth comparison to. Now, keep in mind that I actually I had to go back to watch the original. And also, I also went and watched the new 2020 version. And you guys might remember, I did not do a very in-depth version. My first video was not very in-depth. I did compare a little bit, but I didn't really go too far into it because I hadn't watched all of the new series. So with that said, and now that I have watched the entire new 2020 Digimon series, I do have some thoughts. Now, I did go back and watch the original. For any of you guys who don't know, I did watch the original 90s Digimon Adventure, which is the original one from back in the 90s. I have to say, me personally, this is going to have to do a lot with personal preference, okay? Because the two stories are very different. The new Digimon is a different adventure. So keep that in mind. And also, the characters are kind of new personalities, and they look the same, but they're very fundamentally different in the way that the characters act and the way the characters are. And then also the story itself, I do have some thoughts on the story. One of the things I will say is that me personally, I prefer the older show, the original 90s show, for two different reasons. One is the villains, the bad guys. Yes, that's right. The bad guys who laugh a little bit like this. And also the bad guys who are like, yeah, those guys. Anyway, yeah, the villains in the original 1990s or 90s version of Digimon let's see, how can I explain this? The simple way to put it is that they weren't just a one and done. It wasn't just, oh, we have to fight this guy and we're gonna battle him out for like one episode and boom, he's defeated, and then next villain, right? No, not in the 90s, not the 90s version. There was a lot more build up and a lot more things that happened before and also during their fight with the main villains. So with the original 90s version, one of the things that was really cool was that you had kind of a main villain who would interfere and also cause all kinds of crazy panic and havoc, right? And then you'd have the Digidestined fight or try to get to him. He'd have pawns, or he'd have minions, or he'd have people interfere, and they would fight their way up to the main villain or get up to the main villain, saving people along the way. But also once you get to the main villain, he was the big baddie. The voice acting was really good. And then also he wasn't just easily defeated in 2, 3, 4 hits or by digivolving to Ultimate or Mega or whatever the case may be, right? It took a lot more effort and a lot more to actually beat him, which is my kind of preference as to why I like the OG 90s Digimon. Some of you might be thinking, oh, well, wait, why would you say that when the 2020 version does do something similar? The 2020 version of Digimon Adventure, don't get me wrong, it is good. It is a new story. It is more geared towards new audiences, though, and people who are just getting into Digimon. Remember that Digimon didn't do very well with marketing. The OG, the original 90s version did not do the marketing for it, wasn't very good. And then when the card game came over here, that also didn't do as well as they would have liked. So that's the reason for the new 2020 series. But also they also had to update it. The original 90s version is very old and it's dated, right? The new generation is not gonna understand the jokes and some of the other stuff, right? Now. Back to what I was saying about the villains. The new series does have some build up to the fights, but I will bring this up. From my personal opinion and from what I watched, it felt like it was rushed. It felt like they were just a one and done villain. A lot of times you would have, there's a bad guy or there's a Digimon causing havoc. They'd find him, fight him, defeat him, right? It was very quick. Sometimes you had some minions in there, but there wasn't as much build up to where the 90s version, they took a while to defeat some of the minions. So for example, you had like Edamon, which was one of the Digimon they stumble into in the 90s version. And then he comes back again later on to fight them again. as a metal version of Edamon, Metal Edamon, and he was a pretty tough villain to overcome, as well as the other ones in between you fighting the main villain, so like Devimon and like the Dark Masters and like Piedmon, all that stuff. There were a lot of main and kind of villains that had more build up, but also were kind of stuck around longer. And they weren't just easily to defeat like your new 2020 Digimon. That was one of the things I noticed while I was watching the new 2020 version. Now, not to say that there aren't any big villains in the 2020 Digimon. There are a bunch of or there are two really main ones. There's the Great Disaster in the new one, which also is a giant Digimon, similar to or kind of like the very last opponent they fought in the 90s, which was this giant giant apocalypse kind of Digimon, and he was supposed to be the very, very end, the last villain they fought before the digital world gets reconfigured. Pokemon was the name of the original last villain they fought in the 1990s version. Now, the 2020 kind of takes a similar concept. The new Digimon series, the 2020 version, does do a similar concept. You hear a lot about a great evil in the beginning of the 2020 version, which is Millenniumon. And they do talk about that. That is like one of the main villains in the 2020 series, which was done well, and they did a good job. Devimon is in the 2020 version, but there's not as much substance. He doesn't stick around as long. Yeah, he does Digivolve a few times, and he's evil, but it doesn't have the same kind of. There's not a lot of build up due to the fact that they seem to defeat. You have to remember that the new Digimon, the newer series in the 2020 series, all the Digidescent, same Digidescent Tai and all the characters are more powerful in the 2020 version, which is what I noticed. So when they go to fight Devimon in the 2020 version, they change a few things and they make him, because it's a different story, they do make him more powerful, but there's a downside to where he doesn't have the story build up like he does in the 90s. The 90s version had a really cool story build up and a cool background, and they made him tough. He wasn't easy to defeat, or a little tougher, I should say. He wasn't that easy to defeat because in the 90s version, the characters weren't as powerful as they are in the new 2020 version. I will say that's a big difference in the stories. But the other thing, too, is that he's around for about 1 or 2 episodes in the... He's around for he's around for like 2 or 3 episodes in the 1990s version, whereas in the new one, I think he's only around for like 2 episodes. I think it's only about 2 episodes that he's around. It maybe 3, but he's only around for a little while, and they defeat they defeat like the 90s look or the version of Devimon that you recognize from the 90s. They defeat him pretty quickly, until he digivolves and gets more evil and loses the kind of his kind of personality in the 2020 version, and becomes just evil creature, almost like Venom almost. But yeah, which is not as like I said, the villain build up, the background to the villain is not as good, and it feels like they just defeat them too quickly. Now there are a few they bump into a lot. There are a lot more characters they bump into in the 2020 version due to the series being longer, I should say. The 2020 version of Digimon is actually 67 episodes long, whereas the original one is only 54. So there's a lot more to the new 2020 version than there is to the original, but there's a lot more character build-up, and the villains are a lot more villainous and have a lot more build-up and a lot more character development in the older series, to me at least, than the newer ones. I feel like the newer ones are kind of one-offs. Like they're around for 2 episodes and they're defeated until you get to, and that's at least in the 2020 version, until you get up to about Millenniumon, which is one of the main villains in the 2020 Digimon series. Then you start to see a little bit more character development, and also a little more kind of that main dark, creepy villain type character, but not much. Because again, they do defeat him pretty quickly, and remember the new the characters in the new 2020 version are the same characters, but just very different, and also the same look, I should say, but very different characters, and also played by a different cast, and also have their personalities are a little different. But they're also more powerful than the original 90s, their original 90s counterparts. So yeah, they do end up defeating Millenniumon pretty quickly, actually, within I think a few episodes. I think it's like 3 or 4 episodes, and then they end up defeating him. And they go on to the Great Disaster, who is a similar to Apocalypse from the original 90s Digimon, but not quite. You see a little more character build up and a little more bad guy, a little more character development and a little more build up to the story in the final couple episodes of the new one. But I have to say, I do prefer the original 90s one because the villains were. There's something about having a good bad guy, right? And also like a main villain. So a good example of character development for Digimon was Myotismon in the 90s version. He stuck around for a long time in the original one, and he wouldn't just die that quickly. He was a recurring villain who would pop in and out of the show and cause all kinds of craziness, right? Kidnap people, destroy stuff, cause havoc, mess up the digital world and the real world, and cause all kinds of craziness. You have a little bit of that in the new one, but not as much. And then there's also parts in the newer one where they're fighting, but they won't call it attack names, and it's just action. There's no, I'm not sure what, I guess there's no kind of, you don't hear any, there aren't, like, in the original, they'd always call it the attack name. So you'd hear Noble Blast or Terra Force, or you'd hear the characters yell their attacks, right? Not so much in 2020. There are times where just the action happens and there's no kind of screaming or you'll see blasts and things happening, but the actors won't be saying anything. They won't be saying Nova Blast or the attacks, right? Which is a little weird, especially at least for me. At least it was, because I'm so used to hearing the attacks and hearing the actors do their stuff in the original one. So you have that, but then also, like I said, the villains just seem like a one-off, where because the characters are the same characters back from the 90s, but this time a little different, and also they are a lot more powerful in this one. There's a lot of new elements to the 2020 version, like Metal Greymon has two like crazy arms, like one that's a giant weapon and one that's the claw, right? And the old one, he didn't have that. So there's a lot of new elements they brought in. They brought in a new form for some of the characters too, new Digivolution for some of the characters. They still go up to the Mega forms, so War Greymon's still in it, and all the other characters still the same, just very different, a different feel and a different adventure, with the characters' personalities being different, as well as different cast to the characters. And that's where the villains were where I felt like that it was really lacking. Me personally, I like a good villain, right? I like a villain who is not so easy to defeat, who's going to stick around for a few episodes, who's going to cause trouble, and who's got a somewhat of a decent backstory. One of the things I really like about the 90s version were the Dark Masters. The whole end of the arc, if you've never watched the 1990s original Digimon Adventure from 1999, was when the series was released originally, for the OG Digimon Adventure. If you've never watched it, and it used to air on Fox Kids on Fox, but if you've never watched it, go back and watch it, because one of the coolest things about the 90s version for me was the Dark Masters. The Dark Masters were all villains, but they weren't just your kind of one and done, like, it's like we got the power to beat you, we're just gonna, and friendship and all that mess, and and then you beat them. No, they stuck around. They messed up stuff. They weren't easy to beat. It took you 3 or 4 episodes to unlock the abilities and the powers to actually get to the level to actually beat the big boss. It felt like you were playing a really hard game. and you actually had to unlock, and they had struggles, they had decisions, they ran into minions, you know, they had things they couldn't do in the beginning, and stuff to conquer. So there's a lot more story and a lot more build up to the main villain in the 90s than in the new 2020 version. And that's me personally. That could be just that could be okay. So one thing is that's a generational gap. First of all, because I'm a 90s kid, so that's how I grew up. But you guys, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. You guys might be different. You guys might like the new 2020 version. You guys may not like a long drawn out story with crazy complex villains. Some people do, some people don't. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. What were your opinions? Did you last an entire 54 episodes of the original, if you watched the original, or did you last an entire 67 episodes of the new one? And do you like the new one or do you like the old one? So yeah, so those are some of my thoughts on the 2020 Digimon, and I want to do this video because I thought it was cool to kind of do a head-to-head comparison, and I didn't get a chance to it gave me a chance to not only go back to watch the OG, the original one from the 90s I grew up with, but also watch the new one. Now I will say this, I personally prefer the 90s one, and part of the reason for that, and I've actually said this on Instagram before, is I like the original cast for Digimon. And that also leads me into something else, actually. I like the original cast, the voice cast for all the Digimon, as well as all of the people, or all the kids, the DigiDestined kids in the original 1990s version were just awesome. Now, that's my personal opinion. You guys might like the new one. However, I do like the voice of the new Tai from the 2020 Digimon series. I didn't mind that. That was cool. And some of the new voices are not bad. All of the new actors are really good, are amazing actors. I've heard them in other stuff. But for me personally, I grew up watching and liking all of the OG voices from the 90s, which actually leads me into my last thing I want to say. Joshua Seth is coming back as Tai Kamiya from Digimon. I just heard, I believe it's in the films, in the movies, he's going to be doing Tai Kamiya. So I don't know which films, or like if he's going to be staying or not. That I don't know. But for more information, go check Joshua Seth out. I'll try to leave a link to his channel, to his YouTube channel, as well as you can also search him up on Instagram. Just if you look up Joshua Seth, you can find him on Instagram. But I'll try to leave a link to his YouTube channel down below. Anyway, with that, guys, I will see you guys in the next one. And I hope you guys like this episode. I hope you guys had a great day. Let me know what your thoughts are, whether you are a 90s kid and you like the 1990s OG Digimon, or whether you like the 2020 one, the new one. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Oh, and also, don't forget, if you haven't already, get over here and subscribe, because there's more. Anyway. Farewell.
Hi there. Please subscribe or follow DNA Anime Blog and DNA Studios on all of their social media platforms. Okay, bye!